How's everybody doing this morning? Yes? Okay. So, how many of you use Git or GitHub to track your programming files? Most of us, super, I'm in the right room. I'm so glad when I show up at the right place. Have any of you explored different ways of documenting your projects? This could be, creating ASCII diagrams within your code to show, what is happening if there's any sort of process that the code takes you through, kind of a you are here on a map. It could be, skipping this whole, just doing external documentation and creating man pages. And sometimes, honestly, those obvious comments aren't always so obvious to all of us. It's important to realize that the best docs are the docs that are going to help you. And you need to learn to solve whatever problems you have. Those problem-solving skills are going to be the things that may help us become better developers, as opposed to just learning the tools that we're using in the here and now. So those critical problem-solving skills, even more fashionable than this year's JavaScript. And so since documentation and finding the right way to document your projects and your work takes some, getting messy and making mistakes, I'd like to, show off my profound advantage here, because as a self-taught second career developer, making mistakes is pretty much all I do from the time I open a laptop to the time I shut it. Has anybody else kind of had this experience? Okay, good. I was really worried. I get worried when the room gets quiet. Especially when I'm talking about how many mistakes I make in a day and everyone's silent, I'm like, oh no. So on my way to becoming my doc-loving, experimental, really comfortable telling large rooms of people that I mess up 25 times a day, person, I ended up trying on a lot of different hats. And I'm going to talk today about a problem I had as I was starting to shift from scripting to more front-end, more visual roles, how I developed a solution for this problem, and what we can learn about communication and allowing ourselves to build the tools that we wish we had. So the talk is a little about tooling and a lot about opening yourself up to making the software you need, and in this case, making the Git workflow that works for you. So, in addition to, opening up your computer and having to learn something new every day, being a good place to make mistakes, Git offers us a myriad number of ways to mess up. I put too many words on that slide, and I apologize. So, in conclusion, Git is difficult to learn. We often learn starting with commands, and that's how I learned as well. So, when I was, just like the folks in the XKCD, when I was learning to use Git for the first time, I learned the way many people do. A kind and patient friend told me, these are the 5 commands you'll need to know. You'll need git add, git commit, git push. I got to 3, I don't remember the other 2 right now. That's what it was like working like that every day. So I would keep nudging this friend and say, hey, how do I do this again? We've all been there, right? So you nudge the friend, you say, hey, and finally your friend kind of cuts you off, and you have to do some self-documentation and remember what those 5 commands are. And slowly you learn more and more commands in Git. But since I never did a Git intensive, the whole time travel aspect of Git was really kind of scary for me. I was making my changes locally, committing, pushing as quickly as possible, and then giving myself a ceremonial pat on the back when I saw those things go up online. But you can have a much more complicated Git flow. Now, since I had some difficulty with these time travel elements of Git, And my work had mostly been scripting up until this point. But as I started to move to more visual work, I struggled with the design aspects. So as many of you know, a client, sometimes a PI, will have a much stronger idea of what they want until they see it, and then they kind of want something else. And it was really difficult to force myself to revert back to earlier versions because I wasn't doing work kind of like outside the terminal. There wasn't a sketch pad over here. I was just changing things in the browser as I go along, committing them, and then having to roll back for the umpteenth time. And since I was relying on commit messages for my time travel, I put some work into researching what makes a strong commit message, and we'll talk about that in a second. But time travel using just your commit messages is tough. And if anyone in the room doesn't know that it's tough, maybe they have their commit messages down pat and this isn't an issue for them at all, I'd like to congratulate you. For those of you who have not run into this problem yet, we're going to do some real talk about what these commit histories can start to look like. This is actually an XKCD, but I like to joke that it's like an actual screenshot of my Git log, from any given day. So there's two problems with relying on your commit messages. We all know what happens when you've been working too long. I had some trash commit messages to decipher. And as much as I researched how to make the most helpful Git commit messages I could, and I did find some guidelines, I still fell into that dark place that we saw in our last slide. This one. This is the bad place. So let's give ourselves a little test. What commit messages should we make for this set of changes? I've circled the area that was changed there in the nav bar. We have a color change removal and the addition of an underline. So, there's lots of things we could say to describe that change, but if you were trying to give yourself a mental image of the change, what would you say? And I think this is a small enough room we could probably shout at Veronica and Veronica would hear. So if you want to try that, we could do that.
Increased contrast.
Increased contrast? You're probably better at writing commit messages than I am. So I was very literal. And I said, well, I'm going to remove the neon from the nav bar, and I'm going to add an underline. And I felt really super about this because I was like, I'm describing exactly what is happening. There's going to be, in my mind, a little boop, and I'm going to see it. It's going to be great. But the difficulty is that I was adding more and more detail. I would say first remove the lighter green font, and I was like, wait, there's 5 different greens on this page because green's the best color. But there are a lot of different greens on here. So I would be like, well, I'll remove the lighter, the brighter, the neon one, that one, because I'm not going to use hex values. That's gross. If anyone can look at a hex value and see the color in their brain, that's amazing, and I want to know how you did that because I'm not there at all. So I would start to say, remove, and the lighter, brighter, and I would add more and more details, and I had this compounding problem. And I would go back and I would see this huge, if I hit the space bar. Okay, perfect. So I had this compounding problem that I was making for myself. And I started to wonder, since this whole commit message thing is not really working out, at least the way Veronica writes commit messages, I needed to talk to my friend over here and, get some more concise ways to talk about what I was doing. I started looking for other tools or other methods that I might be able to use to make my commit message more useful or give myself some other cues. So I worked on better commit messages, and we kind of saw how that went. I started looking for other tools that would give me cues. I found that my hex values could be shown within most editors, and that was super. And it does help, but the difficulty is when you're looking at a commit, especially if you're using the GUI like I was at the time, you won't have the editor open to have that aid. So, you know, it kind of got me partway there. And the real difficulty here, like the crux of the problem, is that I was learning a whole combination of skills at once. I was learning these tools, I had to know how to use Git, I was also learning how to do web development and like continuously learning more things in Python. And additionally, I had to learn these like creator skills, you know, this web development and design. And let's just talk about what the design process looked for me at the time. So, I started to take action with this next project. Although I was hired as a web developer, many of the tasks I was given relied on design skills that I, frankly, did not have. But when you're doing contracting work and someone says, I need you to build me a web page, and additionally, I want you to make X, Y, Z decisions, it seems pretty reasonable to say, yeah, sure, we'll do that, we'll make that happen. And remember, there's money involved, so you're like, yes, I will learn and do anything that I need to do. So I Googled heavily, I got ready to make some mistakes, and I spent a lot of time thinking what would make this website useful, appealing, intuitive. And sometimes I would go to bed pretty sure that I had, done a, good day of work and wake up and be like, oh, I somehow paired plaid and polka dots again, but on a browser. So above you can see the variations on a logo I made for one client. And at the time I made these, I didn't understand the research that design entails. So after an initial conversation, the product is about growth, the client likes the color yellow. Okay, so I did that initial conversation, I got some facts and I said, okay, we are going to do variations, we are going to design a logo. I had yet to learn that I wasn't really practicing design. So, has anybody ever set out to build something without considering all the parts of the project that they don't know how to build individually? So, thank you. I was getting really scared. I was like, oh no, I'm in a room full of people that just like build things. I'm really scared of those people. And if they do exist, I'd like to talk about how they learn to do that, because that's amazing and I would like to have that skill too. So I always joke that this is a real live picture of me trying to cobble together the tutorials that I learned, because sometimes you start a project and you don't know how to do all the individual pieces, so you go online and then you spend 10 hours doing a tutorial and you come back and you try to cobble together the piece that you did over there into whatever you're building. And it looks a little bit like this. And if your experience looks different than this, like I said, we should chat, because I would like to know how it is that you've learned how to do that. I would like to save myself that time. So this process of building, if you need to go and learn these other skills as you're going, is extremely time-consuming and demotivating and really difficult to continue with. And as it turned out, that was how I was trying to teach myself design. And it turned out, and I was really going, needed to turn a 180 on the way I thought I should be practicing design. And it turns out that design has methods. Here are some of the methods. It took several seconds for that list to even like fully come up. And I think it'd be really helpful for all of us to, this is a non-exhaustive list. I researched a bunch about design methods and then pulled the things that seem to appear most frequently and be written about the most, and I took to be like primary methods. And you'll notice that when I started working, I skipped straight to the end. I did like that step at the beginning, and I was like, great, I did an interview, I have some facts, and now we're going to iterate. And that is what design is. Does anybody hold about the same understanding of design practices that I was holding at the time? It's totally okay to like give a nod. I see a hand. There are some brave people in this room. Yeah, we are just wrong. So because I wasn't actually following design methods as I was doing this design work, I was needing to revert a lot. And I was using developer tools to do so. So I was sitting there with Git and needing to go back and back. So all this redesign and all this time travel in Git was putting me in a very special kind of version control hell. Has anyone else visited version control hell? Yeah? Okay. Let's not go back there. So the difficulty was it was extremely hard to track changes, as we saw before with commit messages, and it was even worse with my memory. So having tried to throw myself in design, kind of face first, perhaps face plant, did have one upshot. It opened me up to some new ideas of how I could use Git. So without the framework that design offers, I put on this problem-solving engineer hat that I have, and I looked at ways to make it easier for me to preview images without rolling back. And I came up with a few solutions. I was keeping screenshots to show clients, like, see, there's progress, things are happening, please keep paying. No one laughed at that. And so sometimes I would flip through these screenshots like a flip book and look for trends, things that might inform where we should be going. And I had the idea I could just take more screenshots. It'll be so great. So instead of the like dozen screenshots you see here, they would become 30 and 40, and I would have this giant flip book of screenshots. And I thought it was beautiful until I tried to correspond my screenshots with my version control. I was like, I knew we were here at one point, but where is that in Git? Oh no. So I had to do the same back and forth dance that was messing up my flow, and I started seeking out a more programmatic solution. So the next step was to try to save a screenshot in Git, linking it in a commit message so you could click and see the raw PNG. And so I had a couple of pain points remaining. It took time to take each one of those screenshots by hand. At the time, I was just doing the Control-Shift-4 dance. And if I forgot to actually add the screenshot into Git or added the wrong one, I would be back to that giant folder of screenshot situation that I was trying to run away from in the first place. So I had this time, I had to rename and link, and I was also spending some time worrying about if I was doing too many of these screenshots. There was like some time to determine the process that was still happening. So I had used all the tools I could find, and I had started to, put on the engineering hat and try to create my own. And finally, I had an ingenious idea. I decided that I should start talking to other developers about my problem. So, interestingly, I found that people disagreed a lot, and such strong reactions told me I should definitely be working on this more. And I found that usually folks working in agencies said something like, "We don't have time for this kind of documentation." And individual contractors, folks like me, who would be working with a client over a long period of time, perhaps separated by 6 months or a year, the clients would come back and say, "Oh, could you blah, blah, blah." Those folks were really excited. And finally, the folks working at larger companies said, "Oh, we have that." And so who here has heard of screenshot diffing? We're all going to learn about screenshot diffing together. Okay, so screenshot diffing is used by almost every large company I talk to, particularly eBay and Google I found white papers for, and compares screenshots as part of the testing process. So let's say you have these two images. They look the same to our naked eye, right? Two beautiful woodland images, probably the same. But they're not, and if we were to compare them pixel by pixel, we'd see these regions of difference. Maybe there's a filter on one of them. So using screenshot diffing, we can take, let's say those are two screenshots, and compare them, and then we figure out there's this region of difference. And then say if there's 10% or 20% or whatever our threshold is, this region of difference, then we're going to take those two screenshots and we're going to say, well, the new one is too different from the old one, or golden, the thing we're trying to achieve, is too different from it, so we need to get a human involved and either override the work that our screenshot diffing software did. We get really upset whenever there's a human involved, apparently in large companies. I'm a little jealous. And if not, we have to send it back and tell the developers they gotta tweak more things. Does that make sense? Okay, there are enough nods, I feel happy. So it was really exciting to me, as someone who wanted to integrate screenshots into their version control, to find out that there were tools that had already been developed that would take these screenshots automatically. That whole shift, control, for, rename song and dance that was causing me so much pain could disappear entirely from the equation. Why? Because I had asked a question. Well, and because a lot of people had done a lot of work before to make those tools exist, but from my perspective, I just had to walk up to the right person and know to ask. And I wouldn't have known to ask if I hadn't been going beyond the tools and the experiences that I had had and used within my experience type. So going to folks in different settings is really exciting. And I realized I wasn't talking to designers. So sometimes we're working so closely with designers and just desks away that, but we don't understand what they're doing or what's motivating them, and we lose out on the chance to learn from each other. So don't be grumpy cat here, and go out and make some new friends. So when I started talking to design folks, I learned that there already was a Git for design. That's right, a Git for design, and I didn't know about it until now. So they have abstracts compare mode, which is, right down to the commands they use a Git. And that it was really validating for me to see that, and additionally, just to see that designers had been moving towards a Git in the same way I was at Git and moving towards something that was optimized for images. So I want to be explicit about the lesson I learned. Many problems have already been addressed in different contexts. So if you're just recognizing a problem and maybe you're looking around the room and everyone who thinks of the problem the way you do calls it not a problem, you should go into the room next door and ask them, if they have tried to address this problem and what their experience has been. In my case, I could have saved myself a lot of time and research and the difficulty of looking for those tools. So I got ready to dive in. I had some pain points. Well, remember, I had this time to take the screenshots thing. And I had to remember to take the screenshot. I had to remember to take the screenshots. I have to make sure my clicker's working consistently. There we go. I have to add the image to my commit message, and all this is done by hand, and it's terrible. And it doesn't have to be terrible. I did some investigation, and both Pyppeteer and Pyppeteer, if you prefer Python-based, and many other tools will automate screenshots. Originally, I was talking to folks who were using proprietary software, but that is not all that exists. You can use Git hook to hook one action to another. So in my case, I could save a file or commit, and it would, I'm sorry, in my case, I could save a file and it would take a screenshot for me. That way I didn't have to remember. Boop, please. All right, and then my solution so far has been a terminal prompt to tell you to save the screenshot by hand. If you have other suggestions, I'm happy to hear them. So it kind of looks like this. You make your commit to Git. The Git hook calls Pyppeteer in my case. Pyppeteer takes the screenshot, and a terminal says, oh, hey, now would be a good time to save. And one part of my exploration has been realizing the value of the experiences both in, I mentioned second career developer, both in my first career as a geologist, where I was working on maps, which is very obviously visual work, and kind of motivated me wait a minute, I would really be aided by visuals. Why don't we have them? And it was a hard realization to come to the fact that a lot of folks kind of aren't ready for someone who says, hey, why don't we do this? And there was one situation where I was working on an open source project where people told me, at the time I was first coming up with the idea of using screenshots within version control, and they said, no, we don't keep screenshots to track. There are some problems when you convert from PowerPoint to Google Slides, and so this is the artwork made by PowerPoint, but that was going to be a cute emoji. And here are some resources that I used along the way as I was building this. And here's my contact information, and thank you very much for coming. I think we're right at time.